Welcome to Fire Technology Innovations Life and Fire Safety Podcast Series. At FTI, our mission is empowering people for life and fire safety.
Good morning. This is Mike Friedman here. I'm with John Tabachek, and we're here for a podcast on empowering people for life and fire safety. We're going to talk about fire safety today. We're going to talk about fire extinguishers, and we're going to talk about innovation. And we're really pleased to have Chris Powers and Kim Nessel with us for our podcast. We believe that technology and innovation can help people solve the world's wicked problems and fix systemic issues. And we'll be talking about that today. So to kick us off, I'd like Kim, if you would introduce yourself, talk about your background and experiences. And then when he's through, Chris, if you would do the same thing. So thank you. Kim?
Sure. My name's Kim Nessel, and I'm a retired battalion chief from the Eau Claire Fire Department here in Eau Claire, Wisconsin. And but I've been in the fire service since 1977. So, but I spent 30 years with the Eau Claire Fire Department. I was responsible for a large portion of a regional hazmat team in the state of Wisconsin. We covered 14 counties in the state from a hazardous materials point of view. And after I retired from the fire department, I was working at and even while I was working at the fire department, I taught at a technical college, and I teach fire training throughout the whole region in the state of Wisconsin here. And that's where I got involved with fire testing of the extinguishers and that kind of stuff. So.
And my name is Christopher Powers. I'm the owner of Powers Precision Welding. I'm a welding and fabrication surgeon with 38 years experience in the field, licensed for welding and fabrication unlimited. And we offer all certified AWS and ASME welding nationwide with no limitations on site. And we get to be a part of many awesome job sites and projects throughout the United States that most don't get to be a part of. And we also service industrial, heavy industrial, commercial, and residential welding and fabrication as well. We've been in business about 32 years in Crestline, California, and we drive about 1,000 miles one way with our specialized equipment, and then flying with specialized hand tools and renting heavy equipment on site for other jobs throughout the U.S.
Great. Thank you both. Really glad that you'll be here. Kim, would you take us through the story of how you got involved with the Eliminator, the roles you played there in both the development and the testing, working with UL, helping go through the service and maintenance processes, and just bring that to life for us, because you were an integral part of that whole journey that the Eliminator went through.
Well, how it all started was we used to be, while I was on the fire department in Eau Claire, we were one of 8 test sites that were used to evaluate new products that were being introduced into the fire service. And so we would do evaluations, and we would run the equipment through day-to-day operations to see how they performed in the field and provide feedback back to companies. And it kind of established a site, if you will, for companies to come in and not only with the fire department, but also through the technical college there to be able to evaluate some of these and get some feedback on their product. And that's how I met the Rusohs with the Rusoh Eliminator here, was they brought the product into there. And I was a part of 2 of the different evaluations that we had on it. And when I saw it, I gave them my honest opinion of what I had seen, thinking I'd never see them again. And, I told them what I thought, and I told UL was at the second evaluation. They had brought some representatives from Underwriters Laboratories there at that point. And I kind of told them what I had seen in the field throughout the years and experienced. And so I again, never thought I'd see them again. And then a little bit later, the company that was ultimately going to manufacture the extinguisher, they approached me and got me involved with the testing side of it. And so I was on the development of the extinguisher from virtually the very beginning, and all through the testing process through Underwriters Laboratory, including the live burn evolutions that we did. We did them down in Chicago. We did them here in Eau Claire. We have a test site here. And we also did them up in Canada as well. And so that was kind of my involvement in how I got going into it with the extinguisher.
Hey, Kim, about how long ago was that? What year did you actually start with them, and kind of give us kind of a little bit of progression?
Yeah, I retired in 2011, I believe it was. And in November of 2011, it was about a year afterwards before I, really got involved. So other than the two evaluations that we had given them, so it was right around 2012, right into that era.
Those were amazing tests. And I had a chance to spend time with you up at the Chippewa Valley Technical Center Fire Lab, and you took me through that. And would you just share with us, what it's like to prepare to put out 50-foot flames, and then the freezing of the fire extinguisher to meet the UL requirements, and then the elevated temperature of that, and then how you had to load the cylinders up, all that stuff, because people aren't really aware, I don't think, of the rigor of the UL requirements.
Oh yeah, they're extremely brutal, and it requires a skill set that you just don't have as a firefighter. We operated extinguishers every day, just about at work, and how we used them in the test lab was completely different. And we wear specialized equipment. There's only a few of us in the country that actually even do these types of tests, because the skill set that's required in it is something that it's an acquired skill. It's not something that you just jump in there and start doing it. There's certain things that you want to do and you don't want to do in that. But the tests themselves, what it is it's basically a benchmark that all extinguishers need to pass, so that when the extinguisher goes out to the end user, that there's some knowledge out there as to how this thing will perform. And to give you a good example, they'll run it through vibration tests. They understand that the extinguishers sometimes are mounted on vehicles. They're mounted on walls where there's equipment running, where there's a lot of vibration. And vibration is the enemy of the extinguisher when it comes to packing, the material becoming hard on the inside. So there's a baseline test for that. They'll also do temperature extremes, both on the high end and on the low end. And extinguishers will be rated to be able to operate in conditions, typically it's minus 40, or it might be minus 65. The difference between those two is really the environment that the extinguisher is expected to operate. If it's working in a manufacturing facility, the minus 40 is really about all they need. However, if it's in an unheated warehouse in Alaska, or it's working on a rig like Chris's, where Chris is exposed to extreme temperatures that are 20 below, and maybe in some cases even colder than that, then a minus 65 extinguisher would be more appropriate. So we would go through that. Then the fire tests themselves, what that does is that establishes a numerical rating for the extinguisher as to how much fire it will put out. Now, that number isn't really relevant to the consumer. That's a kind of a hard thing. And people will, what does a 3A or a 4A fire extinguisher, what's the difference in it and how would I know? Well, the codes kind of call out that, I shouldn't say kind of, they call out certain size extinguishers to protect certain types of hazards. So something that's in a manufacturing facility that has flammable liquids is part of their, is part of something that they normally, use, presents a much different hazard than it would in a residential home where there's just the normal furnishings around. So that's what that number does. And that's what we would establish, that number. And the fire tests, make sure that the extinguisher has the capabilities of that to be able to put out that particular extinguisher or fire.
And it's fascinating, Kim, that you're a part of the testing of different devices, where on the other side of the coin, where I'm at, it's just on the job site and we're using the product, and it is absolutely amazing. I've used it in 124-degree weather out in Blythe in the August. I've used it up in Colorado at 19 degrees, and the size of the fire, like you were mentioning, for us, if a fire starts, we grab a fire extinguisher and we're putting it out. And so far, we have not come to a situation where the Eliminator has fell short in any way, shape, or form. So it's just fascinating to me to hear, that you're a part of the testing and how all that gets documented. And then on my side, where it's just in the field, actually using it.
And we've had in the fire service, we've had failures of fire extinguishers on us, even pulling them right off the fire apparatus where they have failed to fire off for various different reasons. And there's a lot of things that can affect that, and the end user is part of that. So what we would do, because packing was such a problem on a truck for us, on an engine or a ladder truck or a rescue squad, whatever, they're running up and down the roads daily. We would make 30 calls a day in the city, and in some cases even more than that. That's a lot of pounding, and some are much busier companies than that around the United States. So that constant beating is what that vibration test at UL is trying to simulate. But even knowing that, and at the time when I was on the fire service, the way I wasn't really aware of all those kinds of tests and what they really meant. I just needed the extinguisher to work. I knew what the agent was and where and when I could use it, and those kinds of things. I didn't really know the testing side of it. And now, after going through what I have a much greater appreciation for the UL listing than what I ever had. And the thing that really puzzles me is today you can still buy unlisted extinguishers that are not UL listed on the internet. I mean, you can get, and people don't even know that that's what they should look for.
Hey, Kim, you now saw packing, you knew the inherent issues. What was your first thought, or once you actually understood the Rusoh Eliminator internal auger fluffing wheel? Because, doing these tests, and all of a sudden, here's a new product. You, as a fire professional, seeing something innovative that actually overcomes an issue with a traditional pressurized fire extinguisher. What was your thought on that as the guy who was testing it?
Well, when I first saw it, it was revolutionary, to say the very least, and that aspect of it, where you could actually assess the degree of the agent on the inside, related to packing. And we never had that ability. You would kind of shake the unit. When we would take the extinguishers out of the truck, we'd hit them on the ground. We'd bang them on the ground a few times on the bottom edge of them, before we would put them into use. And the problem with that was the way the siphon tube is affixed to it. Occasionally, you would snap that off if you hit it too hard. And with a lot of extinguishers, I caution anybody that hears this to not do that today, because the way a lot of the extinguishers, the siphon tube is mounted into their siphon tube is the device that picks the agent out of the bottom of the extinguisher so that the propellant gas can push it out. And that you could snap off oftentimes with the design that's out there today. So that's how we've dealt with it. But there was another thing that was, almost as enlightening to me about the Eliminator extinguisher, and that was this polymer chassis, if you will, for the extinguisher. It's non-conductive. It didn't rust. It didn't need a painted surface, and it wouldn't corrode with salt, which we have a lot of salt up here. It's used on the roads to melt the snow and ice. So there's an awful lot of corrosion that goes on up here, and then it just lended itself to be a much more durable material for those types of exposures.
But now understanding that you have something that can actually, we say, fluff the powder, I mean, again, you're not banging it on the ground because, obviously when you bang something that's solidified, the MAP powder, it doesn't turn it into powder. It may turn it into chunks. So, the tube, the hose, that chunk gets stuck in there, and therein lies the problem. So as an innovation, seeing this for the first time, or we're actually really using and understanding it in the finished product, again, I'd love to hear, your thoughts on that and how this is actually going to be a superior product.
That's right. We actually even had a term that we called it when a unit would pass chunks through it, and we called it chugging. And it's kind of a loose term. You probably wouldn't find it in a dictionary, but it actually defines what it feels like when the extinguisher is shooting chunks of agent across it or out through the discharge. And what's happening is you're getting slugs of powder that passes, and then you're getting gas with a little bit of dust. So if you could look at it in slow motion, or even into the naked eye, if you know what to look for, you could see it and you could feel it as an operator. But for the average person to operate it, they maybe shot 1 or 2 fire extinguishers in their life, if they've shot any. And so they don't know that that's not something that is normal to the extinguisher.
Mm-hmm.
But it's a significant issue, the packing in an extinguisher. It happens to all agents, including the agent that's in the eliminator. But from the eliminator point of view, there's something you can do about it. The only other way that any other extinguisher can do anything about it is to discharge it and see if it will work. And wherein lies the problem is, if you need it for a fire, that's when you find out that it's packed and it won't come out. So at least with the eliminator, you could fluff it, and you can fluff it ahead of attacking a fire. You also have a means to be able to determine if where it's mounted in the building could be a problem to the packing. I'll give you a good example. When you mount an extinguisher near a means of egress, a door, for example, there's a vibration that goes on from the opening and the closing of the door. That vibration transmits into the extinguisher that's located next to it. If you're in a manufacturing facility, there's equipment running, there's a resonance that goes on into there because of all the vibrations of air compressors and those kinds of things that happen. And packing occurs quicker in those environments than it does in a residential home where there's very little vibration. But you still need to be able to address the issue, because even over time, the extinguisher, the material that's inside the agent, will tend to settle, and it becomes very difficult to get out of there.
Well, I'll tell you, the design of the eliminator is perfect because of the auger wheel. For example, we have eliminators on our trailers. I've got eliminators that have gone coast to coast, through mountains, different states, 42,000 miles. Basically, if the extinguisher is needed immediately, we just take it right off of the holder. Prior to the job site, we would turn the auger on the bottom to make sure that it's free. And then this way, if and when we need it, it's ready to go. The nice part about the eliminator is that the way it's designed, it can be vibrating on a trailer, on a truck, it can be in a boat, it can be on something that's either moving, vibrating, floating, or flying. And with a quick turn of the bottom, you're able to pull, point, and click, and the material's coming out instantly. And the fact that the eliminator has brand new ABC, it engulfs the flame, it wraps around everything that it touches, versus the pressurized units. You were talking earlier about how they have a tendency to chunk parts. I personally have, over 38 years, have shot off about 5,000 fire extinguishers, mostly ABC. I also have D-rated fire extinguishers for metal fires and so forth. And what I see on the ABC specifically are chunks, different colors of the powder, and then different consistencies. So if you're putting out a fire with a pressurized fire extinguisher, a lot of times the powder is bouncing off of the fire instead of engulfing it and choking the fire with what's spitting out of the end, if you even get half of the product out sometimes. So on these pressurized units, you're not going to hit the bottom of it as a consumer to think that that's what you have to do to use it. You find out, like you say, when you press the button. But with the Eliminator, you've got brand new powder that is just absolutely amazing how it encapsulates flame and the powder drops the BTUs out of the base of the fire, and just the pressure on the Eliminator is very amazing. I personally had a situation where there was a fire 30 foot long, 8 foot wide, and 10 foot tall. And as I was coming around the corner, there was a few people out of their cars with big gulps, and they were trying to kick the fire out with their flip-flops and pour 32-ounce gulps on the fire. So I pulled over, grabbed the Eliminator, and I aimed for the base of the fire starting in the beginning, pressed, and just walked the 30 feet, came back, walked about halfway through, and the whole fire was completely out. Channel 4 News was just making the corner and filming the Eliminator on site, and then I got back into the truck and left because the fire department was right behind me, and it was just impressive. And there again, not knowing what one Eliminator could do, for me, it has nothing to do with the capability of the fire extinguisher. Once it's in your hand, you're thinking that it's going to take care of it. So a fire that size, we have definitely took care of. And I think just the way that it's built, the auger, the fact that it's not pressurized, and the fact that it's easily serviced by yourself is just perfect. And the fact that we can save one life or millions of dollars of loss on a job site, it's a fantastic product. We got rid of 600 pressurized fire extinguishers and are using the maintenance-free Eliminator on every job. And it doesn't matter where we're at, whether we're in the field, or if we're in the shop, or in buildings, or tank farms, or working in manufacturing plants. It's a great product, and I think that it's going to, personally, I think that this fire extinguisher will save 95% of all the fires that are man-made in the world once there's an extinguisher in every house, every boat, every plane, every manufacturing plant. And certainly as a welder, working with 1,000-degree, that's what I do for a living. I magically play with 1,000-degree temperatures with fiber optic line, coax that burns at 240 degrees. With the Eliminator, I'm able to protect the product that I'm welding next to, either prior or if there was an ignition, instantly, without losing a job site. And in my history with the Eliminator, we have 100% no loss.
How many Eliminators in your lifetime, or your team, have you guys shot off?
I'm at 23 for myself. The other people that I work with, because I work with many million and multi-million dollar corporations on site, I would say at this point right around 400 Eliminators, along with pressurized units, either because the pressurized unit didn't work while we were on site, or that we needed to use the fire extinguisher before we started the job to protect, like a prior prevention of spark up.
So you're coating something prior.
Correct. Like I would use an Eliminator to pre-coat the ABC before I weld, so that this way it would be sort of a prevention. I think prevention in my field is the number one liability. You know, as a specialty welding and fabrication contractor, and I'm welding on anything from A to Z. So whether it's a space shuttle or it's a tank farm or if it's a bridge or if it's a a large container ship a quarter mile long and I'm down in the bottom working on an engine, any of these job sites, I need to be able to prevent fire or to put it out instantly if it happens. And the Eliminator is the reason why I'm able to do my job and work with crews all over the United States without having any loss of life or property. And it's just it's an amazing fire extinguisher.
Of those 400 that you and your team have shot off, were there any issues with any of them? You know, didn't work, chunked, or whatever, you know?
No, the Eliminator is pure and perfect from the box. And it's so easy to service yourself. It can be as easy if you're on the job site like I am. If we use the Eliminator, I can just at that point unscrew the cap, put in a new cartridge, screw it in, and be back to a fire extinguisher that works in less than 1 minute.
Wow.
On the job site, that's important because you may not have 5 minutes or 6 minutes to do what the actually instructions recommend, which is when you use the fire extinguisher to take it all apart and then maybe clean this, that, and the other, which we do when we're not on the job site. But on the job site, if you have a fire extinguisher that you're using instantly, you need another fire extinguisher. So it's as easy as unscrewing it, screwing the new one on, and then hitting the handle and you're shooting again. Whereas if you have a pressurized unit, the only thing that you've been able to do in the past is if you need 5 fire extinguishers to do a job, you bring 30. And the reason being is if you have 1 or 2 or 3 that malfunction or don't work at all, you're covering yourself by having multiples behind you. But with the Eliminator, my wife and I have never had a loss with this fire extinguisher, and I do not believe that we ever will. We trust this fire extinguisher with every customer that we deal with, and we're dealing with cellular communication industry. So we're a first responder nationwide, welding on cell towers that are active, jam-packed with fiber optic line and coax, and a bunch of other interesting things, bird's nests, debris. There's situations where a cell tower might be standing in the middle of a valley that has dry grass, 2 foot tall as far as the eye can see. So what we need is a fire extinguisher that's not only going to work when we need it, but that's going to also work for preventive issues. So for us, it is so easy and inexpensive. The fire extinguishers to date for us has saved myself personally over $3 million in loss, from a cellular tower incident to a fire within 2 miles of my home up near Lake Arrowhead, California, which has been ravaged over the last 12 years with major forest fires that we've been displaced from. And so, yeah, it's just a great product. Personally, and what I do is on site, because I'm on with many different companies and on different job sites, is that people will say, wow, look at that. That looks really cool. And how does it work? And how does it save you money? And how easy is it? And really, it's the easiest thing in the world. You energize, point, and click, and the fire is going out. The product comes out perfectly. It's almost like a talcum powder composition. Whatever it touches, it encapsulates it and snuffs it out, or it coats it. It's a wonderful product. We have probably one of the most extensive fire prevention equipment in the nation.
Your vehicles.
Yes.
Yeah, which we saw and just did a little videotaping. But, you know, I wanted to ask Kim a question. Now, Kim, you as a developer and helping this, hearing a client, a customer, somebody who's used the product, What does that do to you? How does that make you feel? I mean, this is something that you were a part of, and he's talking about changing the world because of he's so happy and content and has used the product.
Yeah, it's really gratifying to hear, field use stories like what Chris has experienced. And I'd like to make a couple points here. One of them, in just some of the things that you mentioned, Chris, in dealing with those fires. One of the specs that UL has is the discharge range of an extinguisher, and the discharge range is what puts the end user in a safe area to be able to apply the agent to the fire without exposing themselves to an undue risk. So discharge range is specified in the UL specs on an extinguisher. So a non-UL approved extinguisher doesn't have the range that it should have. The other thing is the discharge time, and that's related to the story where you walked from one end of the fire down to the other end and came back. The discharge time is very, very critical. And there's a minimum specification for each size of extinguisher that's out there, whether it's a 5-pound classification of an extinguisher or a 10-pounder, or a 20-pounder. That time period is specified. And then the last thing I'd speak to in relationship to what you were talking about, and again, it's all relevant to the testing that we had done on the extinguisher, is the agent itself. And the agent itself, it's most people don't know this. And when I was in the fire service for my entire career, I've been around it my entire life. My dad was a volunteer firefighter in the state of Minnesota. My brother is. I've got an uncle that was a ladder lieutenant up in Duluth, Minnesota, years and years and years ago. So the fire service has been my career, and a historic one at that. I didn't know that there was that big of a difference on the agents at number one. But more importantly, what I didn't know until I got involved with this was that the extinguisher is designed around a very specific agent being put into them. So if you don't put the right agent into the extinguisher, it will not perform to meet the UL spec. It may shorten the discharge range. It may shorten the discharge time. It may not discharge totally the amount of agent in the inside, or it may dispense all of it and run on gas for an extended period of time because it shot all the agent before it was supposed to have emptied itself out. And the agent itself is, even though it has, we were talking about Class A materials where it was a forest fire and grass fire that you were dealing with, the main chemical that's used in there is called monoammonium phosphate. We refer to it as MAP, monoammonium phosphate. It's a Class A extinguishing agent. And when you look on a label on an extinguisher, the average person will look at it and say, hey, it's got MAP in it. Well, there's differences in it. They're not all the same. It's the same chemical, but the percentage of the active ingredient, the MAP, in there is different on some. And what is used in the Eliminator is some of the highest quality agent that's available today in monoammonium phosphate. And what that protects against, when we do wall panel tests at UL, it's a huge wall, and the wall is spec'd by its dimension in the UL spec. And we have to not only put it out, but the fire can't rekindle for 15 minutes after the test, after we've knocked the fire down. So we sit and monitor that particular wood to make sure that there's no visible flame, 15 minutes, and there's a stopwatch running on it, witnessed by an engineer at UL. And how that's important to the end user is, if you knock down a fire in your home, the chance of it rekindling and flaring back up is minimal. I mean, it can happen and does happen because sometimes it can't get into all the areas, but it's very, very good at protecting something like what you were talking about, Chris, where you protect the area ahead of a fire. And this stuff is excellent at it because it has such a high percentage of MAP. Whereas to stay competitive, some of the other manufacturers will take And that to stay competitive in a certain price range that they want to operate in, they may go down to 60% or even 55% on the map content. Well, if I've got one that's got 55% map and another one that's running at 95% map, guess which one's going to put the best, the most fire out the quickest and have the least amount of rekindle? It's going to be the 95%.
Well, I can tell you firsthand that in a pipe situation, which most monopole cell towers are, they're actually flat-sided octagon design. So you've got a round pipe, and then you've got coax, and you've got fiber optic line. You might have bird's nest in there, trash, et cetera, et cetera. What our main goal is to prevent a fire is that we take the eliminator and we shoot it at the top of the pole that's usually open or that has an open port. Now, a regular fire extinguisher, as you're shooting that down into the pole to prevent a fire before you start welding, with the different colors and the different consistencies of the product, it's not going down the pole and encapsulating all of these little wires, where the eliminator does each and every time. You were mentioning about the quality of the powder. Now, if a fire extinguisher can save a life or save $1 million in loss, what's $5 on the cost of the powder? To me, it doesn't make any sense. I would pay $1,000 for a fire extinguisher that works when I need it versus one that almost works.
Yeah.
So it does. I've seen firsthand, and that's why I use this product, that it will go into a pole that's 36 inches in diameter with 100 wires in it, and it will encapsulate each wire all the way down 200 to 300 foot long, which allows us to protect the wire and to protect the coax, along with other products that we have, to prevent radiant heat from our welding starting the fire. And that's the problem with a lot of the fire extinguishers up until the eliminator, where we would have 9 products and a pressurized fire extinguisher to do our job. But I'll tell you, that 1 second makes a big difference. If you grab a pressurized fire extinguisher when you need it and it doesn't work, or it doesn't work correctly, it takes another few minutes or a minute to maybe grab the right fire extinguisher in the eliminator's case. So what we do is on site, we have eliminators specifically and pressurized units as a backup. And the reason why we carry the pressurized units still on our trucks today is to show whoever we're working for the difference between the two products. And it's absolutely amazing. But we have phased out the pressurized units for what we do for a living on the job site. We just keep the pressurized unit to show the difference to the client that we're working for, or to actually to make some inspectors and safety personnel happy, because the eliminator's new. So there are people out there today that don't recognize the eliminator, haven't heard about it, don't know about the listing, doesn't know. So I can't argue with some of these inspectors I'm dealing with, so I have the pressurized units. But I'll tell you, I've never been on a job site yet. I've never talked to anybody that has given me 1 ounce of negativity towards the product. And once they see it and they see it working in the field, they're a true believer.
Now, you also mentioned about your insurance rates have actually decreased because of the technology you have, anything, and as well as the eliminator. Could you kind of expand on that a little bit?
Yeah. So as a licensed contractor, and there's millions of us in general on different professions, we're all required to have insurance. And as a welding specialty contractor, my insurance for general $2 million policy might cost $6,000 to $10,000 a year. An umbrella from $5 million up to $40 million may cost another $10,000, $20,000, $30,000, $50,000 annually. So I invited my insurance carrier to come out to the job site for 2 reasons. One, the insurance carriers usually have an audit. And what they'll do is they'll send an investigator out to your job site that they choose, and they will see what you do as an operation based on your insurance policy and what you're covered for. With the Eliminator, I had instant wow, bling bling comments from the safety people, from the insurance companies, and once they inquired what the fire extinguisher was and what the purpose was, we were able to save about 9% of our premium from the insurance companies that were insured by now because of our history and the equipment that we have on site. The extinguisher working 100% of the time guarantees no loss. When we show up on a job, we have to control the job site in the field. And Kim, as you know, a lot of times that's pretty impossible. But as welding specialists, we have to look at the fire prevention. We have to look at the surroundings, the burnable brush, the conditions, the wind, the humidity, what's there, what are we protecting? And then with the right equipment, we're able to control that. And by controlling the job site, we're able to consistently deposit our welds on site at over 1,000 degrees without damaging any of the precious product that's really close to where we're welding, which is why, as a welding specialist versus, let's say, a welder that does gates and fences. Now, any welder, in my opinion, should have the Eliminator for the same reasons that I'm using it. It doesn't matter what you're welding on. It's protecting the surroundings. It's protecting the customer you're working on the job site for. It's also to protect the women and children and the people who are in the homes, trusting you as a professional to do your job without damaging it. I'll give you one example. There is a famous cell tower in San Francisco, and it's about 900 feet tall, and it is smack dab in the middle of multi-million-dollar homes all the way around the tower. And when you're welding at 900 feet elevation, you have sparks that can travel hundreds of feet and still be on fire, allowing a smoldering situation where you would have a starting of a fire. So it is really imperative that we prevent that. The fire extinguishers on a job like that, it's called the Sutro Tower, in fact, in San Francisco, very famous tower. And when I'm welding at 900 feet, I have 70 people below me, ranging out to about 700 feet from the base of the tower, with the Eliminator fire extinguishers and other products to prevent the fire before it starts. If there's an area where we need to cover some product, I would use the Eliminator to shoot the ABC over what we're trying to protect. If there was a wind issue, we would shoot a gel product that is a polymer that works really well for prevention of fire. And then I would use the Eliminator over that gel product, giving it like a nice dusting of the ABC. And it's just a wonderful product. I'm actually waiting for a way to use the Eliminator in a much larger style as well. So when they come out with the 20-pound or anything larger than that, or even something that I could use in even a larger situation on our fire tankers, that would be great for me. But there again, having an extinguisher from 2 pounds up to any size or capability allows you to safely put out a fire, safely prevent a fire, and when you need the product, it works. I mean, the wonderful part about the Eliminator is that it's not pressurized, and it's brand new, and the powder is brand new, and it's all encased, it's all self-contained and fully portable.
Now you do obviously a lot outdoors, and your rig, the way it's rigged. Now, obviously, the Eliminator is made of an engineered polymer, not metal.
Right.
Did you have issues with rusting, corrosion because as you're driving, obviously these the traditional fire extinguishers, metal canister, they're bouncing around. Did you have issues where, after a while you would see corrosion,
Oh,
rust?
absolutely. Working throughout the United States, from the East Coast to the West Coast, we get hit with everything from acid to salt to chemical, to all kinds of situations. And the traditional fire extinguishers, I've had at least 50 in the last 8 to 10 years that have failed while we're driving. So we've had the canister actually fail for whether it got punctured or it was rusted on the bottom and it may have moved a little bit. And all of a sudden you've got a fire extinguisher that's going off, and that can create a terrible situation all in itself. Or you're on the job site and you need this fire extinguisher serviced by a company, and they come out, which is not easy to find as well, and they say, we can't reservice this fire extinguisher because it's rusted. The fire extinguishers, up until the Eliminator, you had a 5 or 6% chance of losing the fire extinguisher because of rust or corrosion or damage. I just recently had a few of my pressurized units serviced actually yesterday in Riverside, and the technician came out and he said, I'm very sorry, we can't even service these ones that we gave you just a few months ago. And I said, really, why is that? He said, because they were installed wrong. And I said, I don't understand. He says, the head has to be on one side of the fire extinguisher and not the other. Now, that was news to me. But here this was. I had UL approved pressurized fire extinguishers that was nothing wrong with them appearance wise, but that they were put together wrong by somebody who serviced it the time before.
Right.
So besides having extinguishers that may not work, the gauge shows full. You press it, it doesn't work. Or you press it and only a little bit of the product comes out. There again, I never did hit a fire extinguisher on the bottom of it because it's a pressurized hand grenade. And if you hit that fire extinguisher the
Hard
wrong
enough.
way, like Kim says, sometimes they can go off by themselves. And I've even I've done this myself. I was helping to put out a fire on the side of a freeway before the Eliminator was available, and one of the fire extinguishers that I gave first responder, it was a battalion chief for Cal Fire actually, and he just starts taking the fire extinguishers that I have and he's throwing them in the fire and not even trying to shoot them off. And he told me flat out, he says, this is what we do and have done in the past because of having fire extinguishers that don't operate when we need them. So if it's a big fire, you throw it in there, and then at least when it explodes, hopefully they get this. So it's terrible when you have a product that doesn't change in 50, 60, 70 years, and you're working around it by figuring out another way, by having multiple fire extinguishers, or maybe doing something that wouldn't be the way it was designed to. So when the Eliminator was introduced to our company, very quickly I realized that this was something that I wanted on each and every job site, and that with the amount of customers and people that I deal with, it's important to show up with quality equipment. And the Eliminator is pennies on the dollar. It's the cheapest insurance that anybody can have, whether it's your house, your car, your plane, your boat, even if it's sitting in a park somewhere, whether it's vibrating or it's cold. I'll give you an example. I work in 122-degree weather. The Eliminator is on site. I work in 20 degrees above zero. The Eliminator's on site. I've never had an instance where I've needed the fire extinguisher and it didn't work. I've never had an instance where I've needed the fire extinguisher and it fell short. Now, as a specialist in preventing fires, I realized that the fire extinguisher has its limitations, but if I have my choice, there is no choice. The Eliminator is what I want, and getting a larger Eliminator when it's available, 20 pound, a 50 pound, or even a way to have a larger unit for, let's say, on a fire tanker setup. All of these situations for our company would be perfect. And I just think that using this style of perfect engineering and product putting together, and the experts like Kim and so many others that deal with the engineering side, the testing side, the theory behind it, it's all wonderful. But let me tell you something, when you're sitting there with a fire that's going to kill somebody or you're going to lose, you feel like Superman with that eliminator there. It's absolutely amazing. And that's why we showcase this product on our rigs. And I have $20,000 thermal imaging cameras. I have a product called Fire Ice Gel. I have Cold Fire. I have Class A foam. I have fire monitors on our rigs that can shoot 160 feet, a 2-inch line. I have collapsible fire hoses, 400 foot long with Viper sprayers on them. I have mass amounts of fire extinguishers, and I have drones with thermo imaging cameras. I've got probes so that I can detect down to 1/2 of 1 degree. But the Eliminator fire extinguisher is the product and the method of getting it to prevent or to stop the fire, which to me is the moneymaker, which, there again, I think the cost of this extinguisher is not only reasonable, but it puts it in the hands of mom and dad.
Yeah.
In the houses, whether you've got a Volkswagen, whether you've got a Ferrari. I can tell you that anybody that's been burnt by a fire or has been in a fire will tell you how horrible it is. And as a specialty welder, when I get burnt, it's a 4th degree. Generally, if I'm lucky, it's a 2nd degree, and if I'm unlucky, it's a 5th degree, and there's nothing left. They've got to carve it out of my body. But because of the Eliminator, I personally still have all my fingers and my toes and my sense of humor. And with this product, it allows me and my team to do our job, to help reconnect and keep America running while being 100% safe. And I really mean that. The only thing that the Eliminator fire extinguisher can't do is it can't operate in 200-mile-an-hour wind, and it probably can't operate out in space. We don't know about that one yet. But in the real world of what is being done every day on the job site, if we can get an Eliminator fire extinguisher in every home, every car, every plant, every plane, everywhere, it will allow us to save millions of dollars of loss and life. Whether it's an animal or it's a child, what I do for a living is has a liability ticket to it. So if I'm welding on a bridge or if I'm welding on a structure, by me doing my job, if I were to start a fire, I could jeopardize all the people that are trusting.
Yeah.
So this product to me is I can't say enough about it. And as long as I'm in business, as long as my wife and I get to enjoy in the future our retirement, the Eliminator will be part of everywhere that we are at, because there again, it's no fun getting burnt. It's no fun losing everything that you've worked for. And a lot of these contractors and companies, they see a fire extinguisher and they say, great, it meets my liability. But they don't realize that the fire extinguisher that they have may not work. It may not work properly. And so that brings up a whole nother can of worms. So for me, I saw the all-around brilliance of the product and how it works in the field and how it saves me. Because if I have a loss, my insurance goes from X amount to double or triple, or maybe not even being able to be insured.
And you're done. You're out of
done.
business.
You're out of
Yeah.
business.
Yeah.
what we hear, and actually what is the truth, is all extinguishers had to pass the UL tests that Kim talked about.
Mm-hmm.
And when they're designed to work brand new. But over time, as you shared, there's issues with the environment, there's issues with vibration, there's other things, but there's also challenges in servicing. And one of the challenges is that UL specifies only using OEM parts and agent as tested. But given the service industry, that's really hard. So, Kim, I'd like you, if you would talk about what are the challenges when you start mixing parts or using different agents, because UL tests these as a unit and they all have to do the same test, but over time, servicing and the challenges with that tend to create these issues. And that might be the reason why, Chris, you're seeing rainbow colored powder, because they've been serviced and they mixed. But Kim, tell us about that aspect of service.
Yeah, that UL listing is good for the extinguisher when it goes into the box. Once it comes out of the box to the consumer, then when things start to change. And this is where there's a bigger systemic problem out there that has created, it's been created over a period of time. And what happens is a lot of times they don't put the right agent back into it. And it goes back to what I was talking about, that there's different grades of it, and there's physical differences in it as well. So a pound of it occupies a different amount of space than another brand of agent. Well, when you put it, it's all put into the extinguisher by weight, okay? And so now that offsets the available space for the propellant gas. So the extinguisher, believe it or not, is designed around the specific parts and the agent that it was designed for. Putting in anything other than that jeopardizes discharge time, discharge range, patterning, its effectiveness on the fire, or its ability to even be able to discharge the agent. So it is critical that the spec parts are put back into the extinguisher. What Chris said about they had that extinguisher where the valve was put in there and it wasn't oriented in the right position. What happens there is a lot of times the technicians will take the extinguishers and they'll lay all the parts out onto a table, and they'll go through the process of checking them and then putting them back together. Well, what happens is the thread cut in the top of the extinguisher starts at a certain point, and then the label goes on it during the manufacturing process. But where that thread starts for another valve, and you put a different valve into it, can be different. So the label, the UL spec says that the label has to be facing the user so that somebody who's never operated an extinguisher, they can pick it up and they can see the label in front of it. If Chris turns that extinguisher and puts it with the wrong discharge valve into it, the label is now on the backside or on the other side. And so they can't see it, and it takes time to orient it, and it's a delay. Delays will hurt you in the field when it comes to discharging and dealing with fire. So that's what happened with those, and it happens every single solitary day.
Well, also, Kim, firsthand, hundreds of times, I have a fire extinguishing company that would come out to service our fire extinguishers in the field. They take the fire extinguisher that may be out of date. They shoot it into a special box. And they take the fire extinguisher and they take it apart. They clean it with a toothbrush. They check this, that, and the other. And then when they're all done, they turn around and they put the same powder that was in mine and the guy before me, and the guy before me, and the guy before me, back into my fire extinguisher, which is a contamination right there. Now, what I wasn't aware of prior to understanding the purity of the ABC is that, well, all powder's created equal. They must know what they're doing, but it's firsthand seeing in the field where they're putting powders from different fire extinguishers into a box, reusing it, putting it back into yours, which makes it clumpy, which makes it different colors, which makes it different consistencies. So they're actually giving you a product. They're giving you a false security blanket. In other words, most people that grab a fire extinguisher trust this unit to do what it says.
Well, you as a professional, okay, people trust you know what you're doing and you're going to do it correctly.
Yes.
So you now put your trust in something you're not really that familiar with, or you are, but most people aren't, is the
Right.
fire extinguisher. So they're the experts, whatever they say, boom. So now we're finding out through tests with a company, Dine Fire Protection Labs, we bring in another podcast, how the archaic way, the clumsy way that these fire extinguishers are recharged.
Mm.
You know, it's a problem. They're under such pressure, obviously, to make money, but when they're doing it, so this is commonplace throughout the industry where the third-party service companies don't carry 11 bins. They don't carry all the different OEM parts. They don't carry all the OEM powders. So they're using universal parts, universal powders, mixing powders, so they can get in and out, which is the inherent problem where it comes, it exacerbates. The next thing you know, the fire extinguishers, if they do work, they're going to not work as designed.
And this is why the Eliminator is so perfect. You get fresh powder, you get the auger, you get the design, you get the method on how it works. It's a perfect fire prevention and firefighting extinguisher that works each and every time. This is what cancels the fire extinguishers that have been here for the last 80 years. So it's wonderful, and to me, it's fascinating to a certain point. As a specialty welder, I can tell you I have limited concentration besides actually welding. So I listen so much, and then when it gets to the point where I'm done, I quit listening. But when you see it, when you are a part of it, that's the big difference. And I can tell you that all this headache that everyone is mentioning today about the industry, what they're doing, what they're not doing, and what they should be doing, we can just say, guess what? It's the easy button. Where is it? There's supposed to be a red easy button here, and you press it, and now all that goes away. It's the Eliminator fire extinguisher, the way it's designed, the thought, the process, the finished product. I can't tell you whether I was protecting the forest or a structure or a job site. That's the only fire extinguisher I want on site for two reasons. No one else has to touch it, and it's brand new, and it's pure, and it works every time. Now, Kim, you may know this better than I do. How do they make this extinguisher so perfect? Why does it work each and every time? Now, that's the gift horse from a contractor's point of view, saying that I trust this thing to actually work. And I've never had a bad Eliminator. I've had 100 bad pressurized fire extinguishers.
What percentage is that? 100 out of?
100 out of maybe 2,500 fire extinguishers.
The percentage isn't that high, but it's too high. You're talking life, you're talking money, you're talking facilities, buildings.
One fire extinguisher that malfunctions could cost loss of life or millions of dollars. In my instance, one small spark on a fiber optic line is $1 million loss. Now, fiber optic line over the last 15 to 20 years has gotten a lot cheaper, but still $1 million loss. So to me, it's like, are you kidding me? I mean, I personally would pay $500 for one fire extinguisher that works when you need it versus $35 or $100.
So we're going to raise the price to you, okay?
Yeah, please do.
Right,
but
yeah,
but
okay.
you know, but here's the thing: why the industry has decided to give a product that they say works all the time at a reasonable cost when it doesn't work all the time.
Yeah.
So I'd like to just say that's a challenge, I think, with education.
Sure.
And the industry is concerned about saving lives and protecting property. They've got the NFPA and other codes for safety. So they really want that, but they need to be educated. And they put the codes in for a reason. And when you have a new technology like a Tesla, you had to create new requirements because you can't do emissions testing on a Tesla. So just like this, with a new technology, we have to educate people and make them comfortable. And, with bureaucracies, there's a challenge because the sitting people don't like change, and innovation is hard. So Kim, could you talk a little bit? You were responsible for the driving force for the Rusoh certification program. But what's your sense for education of the industry that could help with Chris's point? Because he gets it, his life's on the line. And so that's important. But others, who haven't shot off a fire extinguisher might not be as close to that or understand as well as he does.
Right. This needs to be a multi-prong approach. It has to involve the insurance industry, which Chris has been out front in dealing with his insurance carrier, but a lot of them have not been receptive to even know that there's an issue, or even do they want to listen. That's been a difficult sell. Regardless of whatever extinguisher you're going to use, this has to be addressed. This is a systemic issue that's causing problems, and we don't even know how serious of an issue, widespread this is throughout the United States. Although, from preliminarily looking at it and from what we know the practices are, it is massive. We also need the service companies that are dealing with the servicing of the extinguishers to understand that the extinguisher needs to be maintained in accordance with the UL certification, because when it comes to the codes, the extinguisher has to be UL listed. And as soon as it leaves that box and gets its first service, many of these extinguishers are losing their UL certification, which makes it against the fire code, and the insurance companies now have a major concern with it. We have problems when it comes to, as a building owner or a manager, facility manager. Oftentimes what they will do is they don't understand these ongoing problems and how difficult they can make it for the service company that may even be trying to put the rice powder in. So one day they may have brand X of extinguisher in their system, but today they find out they've got to buy 3 more for an addition, or 3 of them are out of service and they decide to buy new ones. Now they buy Y brand. Now they've got 2 different ones inside their building or their facility. It makes it very difficult for even the service people to deal with it, because they don't carry all these different brands of extinguishing agents. And remember, some equipment manufacturers carry 2 or even 3 different types of agents themselves in the monoammonium phosphate line. One to stay competitive in the low price market, and some in the medium area, and some in the very high end, which would be used in industrial settings. But also we need fire marshals and firefighters and inspectors to understand this problem exists, and in the field they have an inability to be able to determine if the agent has been mixed in the extinguisher. It's not possible. But there's ways it can be done to take and make sure that once it's in the field, that it is the right agent. There is things that can be put in place, and there's follow-ups that can be done on the service companies to make sure that they're carrying the right amount of agent and that they're using it. It's not just sitting on a shelf because the code says they're supposed to have one for each brand that they operate on. Well, come to find out, they have it sitting there on the shelf. They don't use it. They buy the cheapest monoammonium they can find because the profit margin goes up, and they're only topping off the extinguisher anyway. So they're putting back in all these mixtures of it. And the worst part about it is sometimes the monoammonium phosphate, the ABC agent, you do not want to use that where there's an oxidizer. There's actually written into the codes where you would not want to use that, chlorine and those types of products. If you were to use it, it can create an explosive gas, and it actually is like hitting the fire with a napalm inside of your extinguisher. it can be very violent and increase the intensity of the fire. So there's a lot of areas that we got to attack this issue. It's going to involve a lot. It's going to involve a tremendous change to the service industry. But the insurance companies have a great deal of exposure on this, not only from those that they insure, business wise, but the service companies that they insure, because they are opening themselves up, not knowing or not turning their head to this problem. They are exposing themselves tremendously on a risk standpoint.
Well, I'll tell you, all of this to me is fascinating because I'm learning as we're discussing today the background and the theories and the products and the way it's supposed to be done. And the only thing that keeps coming back to me sitting here today in beautiful Southern California is that thank God for the Eliminator, because that problem is completely solved. I don't have to worry about changing the industry or waiting until it happens. I hope it happens tomorrow. But until then, thank goodness for the Eliminator that you can purchase today, have drop shipped right to you from 1 to 50 million, and it's done. And there's just no more discussion, which is a plus in my opinion, because honestly, when you're talking about what I do for a living as a specialist, I get paid very well. I'm one of probably I'm the top 3% of welding in the nation. And what I mean by that is my certifications, what I'm capable of doing, what I'm insured for, what I've done, and what I haven't lost. That makes me very, very, I'm like a neurosurgeon when it comes to welding, although I can do gates and fences on your house, for example. But to me, it's like, thank goodness for the Eliminator. It's here today. I don't have to worry about it. I'll leave it up to the experts like yourself, Kim, and everybody else that's a part of this or a part of changing the industry, which I think is going to be the eventuality. But until then, tomorrow we could have 50 billion Eliminators delivered to every house, building, car, truck, plane, and then we can talk about it later. That's my personal opinion. That it's
well,
here.
give us about a week to deliver them, not tomorrow. Give us a week.
No, with that comment, I want to wrap up and thank both of you, because we've heard a great case of why it's critical. We heard the story of his development, and we talked about the future challenge of one of education, not only for the products, but on the service. And not only the service fire extinguisher service companies, but the actual buyers of the Eliminator, because they don't really understand all of this. So that's part of our work as we go forward. How do we work with the embedded base to drive change with innovation to solve truly a systemic issue? And so I'd like to wrap up with a quote. And I found this one from Christopher Dodd. He was a senator for a number of years out of Connecticut. And he said, entrenched bureaucracies are always opposed to fundamental changes. So new innovation always finds barriers by the entrenched bureaucracy. Not that they're bad people, but they want to protect the status quo. So we need to launch ways to educate, just like Elon Musk did with the Tesla, with that innovation for transportation. The Eliminator also has to break through the bureaucracies through innovation, education, testimonials to really help make a systemic change so we can save lives and properties. So with that, thank you, Chris. Thank you, Kim. This was great. And we look forward to your continued support as we drive this systemic change.
Appreciate it, guys. Thank you very much.
My pleasure.
You've been listening to the Life and Fire Safety Podcast.